So last time we introduced this idea of trade being this exception to the rule when it comes to economic growth. And we call it the exception because with those supply factors of growth, we talked about that we have to increase something, whether it's the quality of our resources, the quantity of our resources, or our technology. But the reason that trade is sort of the exception is we're not adding anything. We're just taking what we already have and shifting things around a little bit. Because by trade, what we see is that producers or economies are able to achieve combinations of goods and services that they couldn't before on their own. We're just shifting things around. But we said in order to understand how trade happens, we have to take a look at certain advantages. And we had mentioned two. One was known as absolute advantage, the other comparative advantage. And while both are important, the one that we want to really focus in on is comparative advantage. This idea of a producer or a country being able to produce at a lower opportunity cost. And really all this means is that you're able to produce and give up less of something else in the process. So let's take a look at an example. Suppose that I have my own little business washing vehicles, as does Mr. Miller. And in a given day, if I put all my focus and attention on washing cars, let's say I could wash 12 cars in that day. Or if I put all my attention on washing motorcycles, I could wash 18 motorcycles. Now, for Mr. Miller, if he put all of his focus on washing cars, he could wash 8 cars. If he put all of his attention on washing motorcycles, he could wash 16 motorcycles. But again, those aren't our only options. We could kind of split up our time. Like I could spend my day washing 6 cars and 9 motorcycles. Mr. Miller could spend his day washing, 4 cars and 8 motorcycles. We have different combinations in between. Any different combination that might fall along our production possibilities curve, right? Anything that uses all of our resources to the best of our ability. These points are just kind of the ends, the two endpoints of our production possibilities curves. So let's take a look at these advantages. Who has the absolute advantage in washing cars? Well, again, what we do is we just take a look at who can wash more cars. And if you compare my 12 to Mr. Miller's 8, I clearly am better at washing cars than Mr. Miller is. And therefore, I, Mr. Bradley, have the absolute advantage in washing cars. Now let's take a look at motorcycles. Who has the absolute advantage in the washing of motorcycles? Well, again, I can wash 18, Mr. Miller can wash 16, therefore I have the absolute advantage. Now looking at this, you would say, oh, Mr. Bradley is better at both, so Mr. Bradley should be the one just doing all of the washing of vehicles. But that's not necessarily true, because whenever we talk about trade, what we want to see is who can produce, or in this case, wash more, but give up less of the other thing in the process, right? Have a lower opportunity cost. So what we want to do is focus in on comparative advantage. So let's start here. Who has the comparative advantage of washing cars? Now, in order to find this, what we want to understand is that in order to wash one car, who has to give up less in the process? Or a way you can think about it is, if I want to wash another car, how many motorcycles would I have to stop washing, right? There's no such thing as a free lunch. In order to wash more cars, I would have to start washing fewer motorcycles. So let's take a look for me. We know that I could either wash 12 cars or I could wash 18 motorcycles. So those things are equivalent, for my day, right? Those would take up my same resources, my same time, all that stuff. But in order to wash just one more car, how many motorcycles would I have to stop washing? Because we know if I wanted to start washing 12 cars, I would have to stop washing all 18 of those motorcycles. But how about just for one car? Well, what we can do to both sides is we can divide both sides by 12 to simplify this down. Because then we would just have one car there on the left, and on the right we would have 18 over 12. And if we simplify that, we see that my opportunity cost is that for every one car that I would want to wash, I would have to stop washing 1.5 motorcycles, right? I would have to give up washing 1.5 motorcycles. Now, how about for Mr. Miller? So we see for Mr. Miller, he would be able to wash either 8 cars or 16 motorcycles. But how about just one car? If he just wanted to start washing one more car, how many motorcycles would he have to stop washing? Well, what we would do is we would divide both sides by 8 because we want to get it just down to, say, one car. How about just for one car, how many motorcycles would he have to stop washing? Well, if you notice, we divide both sides by 8 and we have one car is equal to 16 over 8 motorcycles. If we simplify that down, we see that the washing of one car is equivalent to the washing of 2 motorcycles for him. So for every 1 car that he wants to start washing, he would have to stop washing 2 motorcycles. So now comparing these two, who has the comparative advantage? Or who can wash a single car and give up washing fewer motorcycles in the process? Who has to give up less in the process? Well, if you take a look, it's Mr. Bradley, it's me. Why? Because I would only have to stop washing 1.5 motorcycles. Mr. Miller would have to stop washing 2 full motorcycles. Therefore, for every car that I wash, I'm giving up less in the process, and therefore I would have the comparative advantage. But let's take a look for motorcycles. Who has the comparative advantage for washing motorcycles? Well, again, what we do is we set these two things equivalent to one another. We know that the washing of 18 motorcycles for me uses the same resources as washing 12 cars. But what if we wanted to find out how much for just 1 motorcycle? Meaning if I wanted to wash 1 more motorcycle, how many cars would I have to stop washing? Well, what we would do is divide both sides by 18, and we get 1 motorcycle is equivalent to 12 over 18 cars. And if we simplify that down, we get that the washing of 1 motorcycle means I would have to stop washing 2/3 of a car, right? Now, one thing I want you guys to notice here is that this is just the reciprocal from what we had seen before, right? Before it was 1 car is equal to 3/2 of a motorcycle. Now it's 1 motorcycle is equal to 2/3 of a car. And that's always going to be true. It's always going to be the reciprocal of the other, okay? So looking at Mr. Miller then, we know that for him, washing 16 motorcycles uses the same resources as washing 8 cars. Well, how about just 1 motorcycle? What we would do is we would divide both sides by 16 to simplify that left side down to say 1 motorcycle. And 1 motorcycle is then equivalent to the washing of 8/16 of a car. But if we simplify that, we find that the washing of 1 motorcycle is just equal to the washing of 1/2 of a car. So therefore, we look at this and say, in order to wash 1 more motorcycle, who would give up less? Who would have to give up washing fewer cars? I would have to give up washing 2/3 of a car. Mr. Miller would have to give up washing 1/2 a car. And therefore, Mr. Miller has the comparative advantage. Now, looking at this, we're saying, why does this matter? Based on these comparative advantages, what we would end up doing is we would specialize and then trade. We would say, hey, listen, Mr. Miller, I'm better here at washing cars. I have to give up fewer motorcycles in the process. You're better at washing motorcycles. How about you just send all your cars that come to you in order to get their car washed? You send them to me. I'll wash the cars. And any motorcycle that shows up to me to have it washed, I'll send it to you. And guess what? By doing that, we are able to be more productive. We're able to do more and do more business as a whole by specializing and trading than we could before.